Hey there, and welcome to the Jeffrey Van Dyke Show, a podcast for paradigm changers. Each week I speak with another influential leader who's changing the conversation for their audience, their industry, and this world. I am so glad you're here. Welcome to the show. Dan, I'm delighted to have you here. And I'll share with folks in just a little bit about the why of that, or some of the whys. But before we dive in, I wanted to share a little bit about you. So you started your career at Time Inc. You had a whole publishing career at, in the publishing industry there. And then life took a left turn and you went into the wine industry. So I know you went to Italy, worked in Italy. You thought you were going to return to New York and work back in New York, but then you got an invitation to harvest at DeMaul in 2006, I believe. After that, you became head winemaker at Larkmead eventually, and worked there up until recently, while at the same time started your own project, Masakon. We'll talk a lot about that as we get into this. Just a few little accolades, you were named San Francisco Chronicle's Winemaker of the Year in 2017. You've gotten 100-point scores for your wines. You were in top 100 wines in a few different publications. So you've done some things, and you're a renaissance man in the wine industry. In a way that intrigues me and inspires me. And this show is largely speaking to folks that have ideas that elevate humanity. That's the whole purpose of this show. And I think you're one of these people answering this calling to say, hey, there's another way. And it's inspiring to me to have conversations with people from all sorts of industries that are doing their part to reach into what can be for humanity through your work and through your voice in the world. So thank you for being here. I'm really, really delighted to have you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm excited to chat with you too. And we can jump right into the Act 3 about elevating the voice of an education of not only wine consumers but consumers, and using wine as a vehicle. So we'll get there, I imagine, during this conversation today.
For sure. So I want to start here actually because I met you, quote unquote, in a different way than I've ever experienced with anybody else, which is I had a bottle of wine that I got, I think at Costco, actually, this Austin Hope Cab. And I really liked the label. Design's a big thing for me. So I looked it up, and it was in a top 100 list, I think, for Wine Enthusiast. And there you were at number 7, I believe, for Masakon, for the Anya White. And again, I normally don't buy wine via label, but there's something around certain design aesthetics that just speak to craftsmanship. And your label reached out to me. I was like, what's that? And we were away for the weekend up in Lake Arrowhead in California. And I still remember this Airbnb, and I'm just down there on my computer, getting into this world of Masakon and kind of researching your wine, and read this article about you in the Chronicle about being Winemaker of the Year. And I went to your website and I signed up for your mailing list. I bought a bottle at K&L, my local wine shop, and then this funny thing happened, which again hasn't ever happened before. I'm going to read this. I got this email shortly thereafter of signing up for your mailing list saying, "Hi, Jeffrey. Just a quick note thanking you for signing up for the Masakon mailing list. I truly appreciate it. I just released some new white wines earlier this spring, so maybe this was a coincidence that you signed up. But if you wouldn't mind me asking, how did you stumble upon Masakon? I'm always curious to know how folks learn about us and if you've tasted the wines before. When you have a second, drop me a line. Thanks again. I hope you have a good week. Please stay healthy and safe. All the best, Dan." And I still remember sitting there reading this at this Airbnb house going, I think the winemaker just emailed me. Like, I don't think this is a bot sending an autoresponder, right? I think this is this guy, Dan, who just emailed me. And so I shared, a little story about how I stumbled upon the wine, and you replied back. And, for the last couple of years, every now and again, when I've seen K&L feature your wines, I've shot you an email, and you've always been responsive, which is curious in that, like, I've never had any other wineries stay in touch with me, not their tasting room manager, not somebody that works there, certainly not the winemaker. So this isn't directly related to the whole purpose of the show, but I asked you when I reached out and said, hey, I have the show, I'd love for you to be on it. And for the listeners, you'll hear Dan is a Renaissance man. He does some really creative, interesting stuff that you wouldn't think of in the wine industry. We'll get there. But you shared with me just a little bit about your philosophy on that, and I think it's valuable for all of us. So how did that happen? Was that is that a regular thing for you?
Yes. No, I appreciate you sharing that story, because it's a big part of my my customer focus, my customer centric concept around wine, because wine is incredibly intimidating. And I think that we all, when I think about my experiences with wine and my friends when they consume my wines, they may bring a bottle of Masakon or a bottle of Cabernet that I made at Larkmead to a dinner party, and they'll say, hey, I went to high school with this guy, I played college football with this guy, I worked with him at Time Magazine. And that's the extent of the confidence that they need to share that wine. Because I think wine is just incredibly intimidating, and I treat all of my customers, yourself included, and don't feel offended by this, as what I say is 7-year-old boys. And the reason why I say that is because when I started my career at Time Inc., I was in charge of Sports Illustrated's websites, and I had to build Sports Illustrated and Sports Illustrated for Kids websites. And on the Sports Illustrated for Kids website, we had an email button that said email the commissioner, and then the group of kids who between 7 and 13 who were our audience at the time for Sports Illustrated for Kids would email the commissioner, and I was the commissioner, I was the webmaster. And I was like, well, if you were a young kid and you emailed the commissioner at Sports Illustrated and he wrote you back, the first thing you're going to do is go to your classmates or your buddies in the park after school and say, the fucking commissioner emailed me back, and that's the same thing. I treat you, an older gentleman, the same way, because I think, you don't expect it, and it's human, and it's like, it's a connection. And then you'll tell that story again and again. And word of mouth is the biggest driver, for call to action in any consumer marketing business. And I think that authentic approach towards it is really important to me. Fast forward to when I left the editorial side of Time Sports Illustrated and moved over to Time Magazine, I had a boss who was probably one of the most influential, smartest people I've ever met. He always made a decision in a meeting, and he never left the day without answering all his emails. So I learned I said, I'm always going to make the fastest, most efficient, effective decision I can make, and I'm always going to answer all my emails. And so I got very good at typing, and I got very good at responding, and I got very good at just connecting with people. And during the pandemic is one of those times where I literally put my cell phone number in my outreach, and I said, call me if you need anything. Because I think people just need a connection, and they needed an ability and wine being so intimidating, you want to escape that initial question you ask yourself: did I make the right decision by buying this wine? Am I looking like a fool in front of my friends or the sommelier, or am I sounding ridiculous when I ask a retailer, telling them that I like Kendall Jackson's Vintner's Reserve, and are they going to laugh at me? All those things would make you self-conscious. So my thought is, connect with people on a human level, make them feel confident that when they touch your wine and drink your wine and hold it in your hand, pour it for their friends, they have a human connection that builds self-confidence around it. And I think that's an important part of the experience. Since I don't have tasting room experiences, I don't offer in-person tastings and visits. I offer this, virtual connection, which during the pandemic became, I did over 120, virtual cocktails or drinks or tastings with mailing list members during that period. And sometimes it was just a 15-minute FaceTime.
Yeah.
And that's just how we all should handle our business. We should be thinking about our customers and how they feel about our brand.
I love that. And it's very disarming. And I did kind of run around like a 7-year-old boy. My friends were friends came up to visit, joined us the next day. And I'm like, yeah, this wild thing happened yesterday. Right. And I've gotten a number of people into your wine since then. And I'll always share that story. So I love that. And, Masakon is a white wine brand. Well, that feels too limiting for what I think it actually is. But you make white wines, and you use Friulian varietals, which is an area of Italy in the north, just below Austria. So they're grapes we're not used to hearing about, like, and tell me if I pronounce this right, Tokai Friulano. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. Among others, right? So I love that. And when I talked to you, you just said, it just takes a couple of minutes each day to email. You get a few people signing up for email list each day. It doesn't take long to send a few emails. So I love that. And I love your story and your thought behind it, because I think it speaks to your human centeredness in everything you do. I want to start just a little bit about your story moving from time into wine, because I think there's many, many people at this point in history getting that tap on their shoulder or in their soul saying, hey, there's something else for you. There's something more or something different. And it doesn't always make sense. And you can't always figure it out. I literally just got off from a call with a client of mine who's a big real estate developer who has this calling to build homes in such a way that it gives people more self-actualization. Like, that's not like, you don't go to the local chapter of your association for, real estate developers and talk about self-actualization usually. Nonetheless, he hasn't been able to shake it, and he has this vision for it, right? And so I'm helping him bring that vision to life. When I was at Microsoft, I didn't ever know I'd end up doing what I was doing until a fateful date that set me on a new path, when I knew I was supposed to make a change and didn't know what it was. What happened that got you to Sicily? Like, what was that? Were you feeling burnt out at time? Did you want something different? Did it feel like it was dead, but you didn't know what was next? How did that occur?
I will always jokingly say you had a midlife crisis, but it was a confluence of events. And I think there was one particular conversation, which I'll tell you about, that actually kind of put the nail in the coffin for me. But, I grew up in, kind of a single parent household in Brooklyn with siblings. We didn't travel much. We didn't have a lot of money. I lived vicariously in the pages of magazines. That's how I got into the magazine industry. I have a strong love for, the tactile turning of the page, seeing, advertising spreads or spreads of people in Europe eating under canopies of trees with beautiful, tableware and food and people and joyfulness. And that idea of travel has always been something that I've wanted to be experienced. I wanted to live in those pages. So that was like a big part. And that happened for me all the way from a teenage years. I was early subscriber, one of the first subscribers of Condé Nast Traveler. So I always kind of lived that way. It wasn't books per se, but it was magazines that really spoke to me. So that was a big part of my life, going into my, out of my teenage years into my 20s when I worked at Time Inc. And then as I got into my 30s, and I was very, when I was at Time Inc., I worked 5 jobs in 10 years. And I was kind of on this track, and everyone knew it. And they were like, oh, Dan's part of the Time Inc. mafia. He's going to run one of the magazines and eventually run the company, blah, blah, blah. It was kind of like, I worked in edit, I worked in consumer marketing, I worked in advertising, sales, finance. And but I always stay. I was on the Sports Illustrated and Time Magazine side, which, if any media geeks and knew about the old days of Time Inc., it was the women's service publications, People, Entertainment Weekly, In Style, Real Simple. And then it was like Time, Fortune, Money, Sports Illustrated, and where the engine was happening in that in Time Inc. was in the women's service book. In the early 2000s, as we had this run up, and the money was being made there. The voice was there for the company, and I needed to make that jump, and I was afraid to make that jump. And I was like, am I going to be accepted? And from the men's side of publications to the female women's services side. So I was offered an opportunity to go work at the Wall Street Journal, to launch the Wall Street Journal. I'm like, that felt a little bit more, kind of in my lane. And so I was going to go run the weekend journal for the Wall Street Journal back in 2005. And I had just finished business school, and I was talking to my mom about work. And I was 32, 33 years old. And my mother's working as a paralegal at a law firm in Brooklyn. And she said to me, I'm going to work till I'm 70. So she was a working mom. And then once all the kids are out of the house, she loved her work, because she had an empty house, got her an opportunity to go out and have a great time with her colleagues at work. And I said to myself, wow, that's another 30, almost 40 years. I'm like, I haven't even lived that long. I'm like, I'm going to work for another 40 years. Holy shit. and so that was the moment where I took that step back and said, if I'm going to live this vicarious life and just be a worker for the rest of my life, I need a break. I need a sabbatical. I need to take some time off and then figure out what was next. I had a side hobby of getting into wine and being the wine guy amongst my friends in the city and at restaurants. And so the one thing I knew the stories, the history, I had a love affair with wine, the flavors, the taste, all the profiles. I didn't know how it was made. So I took that moment and saying, if I was going to leave Time Inc., the company that I adored and I never thought I would leave, I'm not going to go to a competitor. I'm not going to go to a newspaper. I'm going to drop the mic. And, I said, I'm going to move to Italy and live there for a year as a sabbatical. I'm going to sell my apartment in Brooklyn and take the risk and live there for a year, come back, and then hopefully re-engage myself to the New York City community, whether it be in wine sales and marketing. I have an MBA. They might want someone who's actually lived and worked in Sicily on a vineyard. I was like, it seemed like the right transition back after a year. And that's how I got there. And then when I got back, it was a little different. It wasn't an easy transition back into. I didn't expect to be where I am today, sitting here talking to you from Napa Valley as not only as a winemaker but an owner of a winery. I thought I would work for sales and marketing and be a brand ambassador for a winery. Whether it be a European winery based in the United States, or whether a distributor or wholesale or some capacity. I didn't expect to actually be a creator, but also now a business owner.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I think there are many of us, when we're doing that dance of following our calling, that we end up in places we could have never seen or imagined. I never thought I'd be a business owner. It was actually a kind of a reality wake up when I'd made the transition into being a business owner, and then realized, holy crap, I'm not just doing this thing. I actually have to run a business to do the thing, which is a whole ball of wax.
And I don't say that my pathway is the pathway for everyone. I mean, I feel incredibly privileged at the time. I mean, I had a small apartment I was able to sell to finance my trip. I had no relationship. I had no partner. I had no children. So I was 32 years old. I had a little bit of money in the bank to do it. And it was very risky to pull myself out of my pathway. But I still feel like I had, I was taking calculated risks. But it was like I said, I never expected to be here at all. It's pretty cool.
So you worked in Sicily. So you worked in Sicily, you came back, eventually you ended up getting a call to work harvest with Dumal. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I still remember the first time I had their wines, which is super good. And then the winemaker Dumal was also connected to Larkmead. Is that right?
That's correct. He was a consultant at Larkmead and needed a full-time, day-to-day winemaker at Larkmead. So he took an opportunity to teach me and mentor me and kind of groom me in that position over the course of a number of years. And so yeah, January 2007 is when I landed full-time at Larkmead.
That's amazing. And Larkmead's a historic grower of grapes, and then didn't really start making wine again under their own label till what, 90? When was it?
Late 90s, 97.
Yeah.
Kind of when the entire Napa Valley decided it was time to make wine, because Bob Parker said, wow, there's some pretty good stuff happening out here. Yeah. So everyone was like, I think we should do this.
Capitalize on that.
It wasn't a bunch of young entrepreneurs who decided all at the same time to do it. I think there was a big influence, a big tidal wave of Bob Parker influence that came through and pushed a lot of growers from being grape growers to wine makers. Yeah. And it was for the better. It was for the, this is an incredible community of high quality growing grapes and making wine. So it's a pretty special place.
Yeah. So you were at Larkmead, which is primarily a Cabernet house, like big classic Napa cabs, and became head winemaker when?
2012. So that was kind of when I started to take over the reins, and Andy, my mentor, left in 2013. So I had, that was when I was like, okay, now I can put my stamp on this.
Yeah. So you were there until just recently, and I'll ask you about that in a minute. But I'm curious about this other thing. So here you are, like, that's a pretty short period of time, actually. To go from 2005, I leave Time Inc., I end up in Italy, I come back, I end up in Napa, and then by 2013, and you didn't go to school to be a winemaker, right? You didn't go to UC Davis or something like that. You're head winemaker at a place that sells Cabernets. Like, these are high-end, $100 and up Cabernets. That's pretty extraordinary. But you also then start Masakon. When did that happen? And what was how did you work that out, basically, while being at Larkmead?
Well, I had the good fortune of a lot of the wine industry is built on, if you look at the wine industry in Napa Valley as it is today, there's a lot of, it's very corporately structured, which is a really sad thing to say, as we all think of this place as, very bucolic and authentic, and which it is. But it is, you have small, you have vineyard management companies that run all the viticulture, and you hire a vineyard management company, and there's 2 dozen of them here, really good, strong 10 of them. And then there's probably about 2 dozen. You go out, so you don't need to be a farmer. You can just go out and hire someone to farm for you. You can hire a consultant to be your kind of overarching viticulturist. You can hire a consultant to be your overarching winemaker. You can rent a facility to make the wine. So it's a lot of virtual wine brands in the Napa Valley. There's only a few estates, maybe 10, 15, 20% are estates like Larkmead, where you have your own vineyard, you have your own winery, you make wines from your own vineyard. So we have a general practice of winemakers and viticulturists working for many wineries. Some of my friends here in the Napa Valley, they'll make wines for 50 to 100 different wineries. Not a lot of people know about that, but that's just the way the business has been set up. So there's this architecture of, like, the business owners here understanding that you might be hiring a hired gun, or you might be hiring someone and giving them an opportunity to split off and do their own thing. The impetus with Masakon was purely passionate and purely romantic. Me wanting to drink white wines like I drank when I was living in Italy for a year. I wanted to drink Mediterranean style white wines that were fresh and vibrant. The Napa Valley terroir includes a Mediterranean climate. It's very hot here. The diurnal shifts from the night, you go from really warm days to cool nights. It stays warm throughout the day. It's dry, 6 to 9 months a year. So you're spending a lot of time outside eating and drinking in the early evenings. It's still very warm. And I didn't find that, I found it awkward that the culture of eating and drinking here, the culture of food was very similar to, there's a new California cuisine, also very Mediterranean. So it's very light, it was very bright, very colorful foods, but the wines were very rich and hedonistic. So there was an imbalance between the weight of the food and the weight of the wines. And whereas Europe is very much more in sync with the balance of the weight of the food and the weight of the wine. They kind of, they work really well together. And in Napa Valley, I just didn't see that, living here. So Masakon was my answer to that. It was, I can go to a wine shop and buy these wines that I want to drink, but also you have to remember 2005, 6, 7, 8, wine shipping wasn't necessarily a big thing at the time. Napa Valley is not going to have a bunch of retail shops that sell other things than Napa Valley wines. They're filling those retail shops for the tourists that come visit us. So I had to go and shop and find my own wines in San Francisco, and it's a 2-hour drive. I don't want to be driving 2 hours to buy a bottle of wine. And I also felt I wanted to have my wine shop experience like a bookshop experience. You want to go in and chat and talk to a human being and get a recommendation. And that wasn't, so Masakon really kind of was, all of those things came together, and it was like, we should be drinking differently here. And our culture of wine drinking is still growing. I think we left the, post gold rush, 1849, when all the immigrants came over to the West Coast, and they realized that they didn't find as much gold as they thought. They had to settle in California, and they settled this incredibly agricultural community, and they brought with them what they know, and they brought with them grapevines, and so we had a lot of German, Italian, French, Spanish settlers, and they brought grapevines and a culture of eating and drinking that we kind of stopped. It kind of broke down during Prohibition. So you fast forward 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and Prohibition happens, breaks down the culture of food and wine. And that really set us back, I think, as wine consumers in America, as to making food and wine a comparable table-friendly, kind of situation. Whereas we went where everything just kind of got divided. And then you fast forward to after World War II, and we become, kind of industrial agro community, and it's like at the end of a hard day's work, you wanted something cold and bright and refreshing, carbonated like a beer. And then that's what happened. So the wine industry is still catching up in California to the food industry and the culture of eating and drinking that we appreciate every time we visit Europe. And so that was really, this historical kind of push for me to start Masakon, and then have the support of the community and my bosses at Larkmead to do it. And it was Napa's only white wine winery, so I was kind of harvesting on the early side and wasn't interfering with my work at Larkmead. I always used to joke around saying it was like pregame to harvest, because I got to see what was happening, with flavor profiles, with chemistry, with different regions, how the harvest was going before I started, playing in the big leagues with Cabernet and for each harvest.
Because they're harvested later in the season.
Yeah, there was kind of two harvests in the early season and then late season, and it was a really good. It was really good to keep me busy for all the month of August, as I was starting to get back into this idea of it's harvest, and I got to be very serious when I think about harvesting for Cabernet grapes, because it's the king of Napa.
Yeah. So there's a couple places I want to go. I just want to get one piece around Larkmead, and then I want to start talking kind of the bigger mission of your life and work in the world. You left Larkmead really recently, yeah?
July, yeah.
What was the impetus for that?
I don't think I would ever be able to fulfill my goals and aspirations with Masakon and all the things I want to do with Masakon, which is taking Masakon and beyond wine, if I still had a day job, and also, and if I think, there was for years, there was this kind of push pull tension, kind of, Catholic guilt of building this really fast moving, successful white wine brand that is in the small universe that it lives in, it's very, very, very influential and important. And I think that's that kind of, in order to continue to grow that universe and spend all of my waking energy, mental energy, and also physical energy. I couldn't do that while I was, kind of grounded somewhere. It just didn't feel right, so it frustrated me a little bit over the years, and it finally came to a point where we got to rip the Band-Aid off.
It so often with the folks I work with, I find that oftentimes we're doing a thing like you at Larkmead, and over here we're growing this other part of our calling. And then there's that point where we got to go, whew, all right, I gotta put a line in the sand and step across it. So I get that.
And I jokingly used to say to everyone when I was, kind of doing my farewell tour of New York City, I said, I did magazine publishing in my 20s. I'll be a winemaker in my 30s. I don't know what I'll do in my 40s, my third act. It took me a little longer. Like, there wasn't exactly those decades of life, but with Masakon, I'm not only a winemaker, I'm a business person. And I think even though it's in the same industry, I'm working in a completely third act of my life and career and professionalism, because I am moving more towards, yes, I still creatively make the wines. And I did that exclusively almost in my 30s. Now in my 40s, I'm actually a business person. Let me see if I could be successful doing that. I was so fortunate to be very successful, doing, the winemaking over the last 10, 15 years. Now I need to prove to myself if I can be a successful business person.
Yeah.
And that's where that's my calling right now.
Got it. I want to talk kind of big picture about the state of the world and where your work fits into it, the voice you're trying to bring to it. And I want to kind of do two sides, because there's a lot you've got going on in Masakon, including the Masakon Magazine, for example, which is, not something we would normally think of related to a winery. But before we get there, I'm curious about your relationship and your work in the wine industry around environmentalism, around global warming. Where do you see that we're at? How are you trying to have an impact in it? I know you've been a part of some different organizations in Napa trying to address it. You've hosted some, gatherings around it. So what can you share with us about what's happening in the world? Because obviously as global warming happens, the nature of the wines we can even grow and where we can grow them changes. Bring us into that world a little bit.
Sure. No, I got into the world because I took a little bit of my past life, which is a love for data and trends and watching them and watching where they're going. So not being an academic in wine, I looked at wine as almost weirdly like a statistician in a sense. I would look at numbers over time, and I would see where things were going. And a grapevine is a perennial; it does the same thing every year. Okay, well let's chart what it's doing every year and overlay it and see what happens. And let's put the external factors into the equation. And the external factors are, some of them are the majority of them are Mother Nature, and then it's the human condition that kind of intervenes. So I noticed that Mother Nature was taking, painting a big swath of change on what the grapevines at Larkmead were doing over the course of, the 10, 12, 14-year period I was there. And I started to ask questions about it and look at it and see what was going on. And as from the questions I was thinking about were sensory questions, because with wine, it's a sensory experience. You smell it, you taste it. It has a flavor, it has an aroma, it has a perfume, and these things are attractive to each of us in a different way. So Mother Nature was changing a little bit of that sensory impact of the finished wine. So I needed to figure that out. And so I started asking questions. And then I started talking to people who knew about this shit. And I started creating conversations around it. And then I started to write my own op-eds about it. And this all started in 2017, 18, 19, when we had our big fire in the end of 2017. As I went into 2018, I was like, all right, we had this major cataclysmic event. It's also not the first of cataclysmic events that I've experienced in Napa. A crazy earthquake in August of 2014, massive droughts, largest recorded rainfall, all these things were happening. I'm like, I could literally count, from 2014 to the present day 2021, some of them, record breaking climactic events in our region, like record breaking, highest seismic scale earthquake, largest rainfall, deadliest wildfire, largest wildfire. We just had 9.5 inches of rain in one day on Sunday, 3 days ago. So that shit is real, right? And it's impacting how we move forward. So I said, okay, well, there's no reason to look back, take data, turn it forward. And so I started moving the conversation forward about what the future of the wine industry looks like, and took some steps with my previous employer to help think about the next, the next 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, those come up very quickly. When you're thinking about making wine in Napa Valley, you're constantly, every year a new vintage is released, and you kind of get caught up in the idea of growing grapes and making wine and selling wine, and then, oh my God, it's happening again. And it's like you're constantly running to catch up with a lot of the activity, because the wine industry is one of the most vertically integrated businesses, from agriculture to manufacturing to hospitality to sales, marketing to wholesale third party relationships to direct consumer relationships. It's like it's not a lot of businesses that handle all of it. So the wine industry gets caught, and it's like we need to actually take a moment to step back, and we need to look at the full impact of what's moving forward, because right now there's only two things that are gonna impact the wine industry, and it's climate change and it's consumers. And we can talk about consumers on a whole nother podcast, but climate change is, and we have proof, all those cataclysmic events that have touched us here in this community since 2014, last 7 or 8 years. It's they're not going away, and they're becoming more extreme. And that is something that we as a community have to really, truly get behind to become more resilient. We will always grow great grapes here. It's just the name of those might be different. The flavors might be different. We're still so young, and we're still so much evolving. And I think that, we've had so much success as a community in the last 25, 30 years in the wine industry, that I think we're afraid to veer off course from that. And we're afraid of these existential threats like climate change. We're just going to keep our heads down and keep pushing forward.
Okay, we just started really getting our groove here, people.
Yeah. I mean, we started literally really getting our groove. And I always say, Napa community, just look at the math on travel and tourism in the last 20 years. The numbers every decade double. They go from 1 million to 2 million to 2 million to 4 million. Oh, if you look at the surveys that they've done since mid 2000s to the present day, every 10 years, the numbers are doubling. And I'm like, so we're on a roll, right? Why don't mess with a streak, right? It's a very big sports analogy. But someone else is messing with us, and it's Mother Nature. And so I took it upon myself to be very vocal, very active. I work on the board of the Napa Valley Grape Growers. I run their environmental and climate committees. We are setting up educational seminars. We're putting forth best practices. We are trying to convince, we will be trying to convince, this is a 2021 initiative going into 2022. We will be kind of working with our constituency to help them, kind of find what's right and within their means to kind of move forward, to help be more resilient, to teach everyone to be more resilient, to understand when massive droughts happen or incredible rainfalls or wildfires, what we could be doing to protect our cash crop, our commodity, which is the grapes first, which then become wine. So this is where I'm at today. And I've become, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've become the person to talk to in Napa Valley about climate and its impacts and what the future holds. It's a really good place, because I'm not the only one now who's just standing on a box in Hyde Park screaming, climate change. I think everyone. Oh, fuck yeah. Yeah. My nickname was Doomsday Dan. I had, constituents of organizations come tell me to shut up. I, been laughed at in the background. I've had other people reference me in the press, and and it's and times. I mean, that was just 3 or 4 years ago, right? Like, that's changing so drastically. I think a lot of those people are truly like realizing, like, whoa, this is the problem.
Yeah.
And as we know in life, no one makes any monumental change to their business practice unless it's monetarily involved, right? And climate is and climate and the current conditions are causing financial impact to businesses in the Napa Valley, and that is not going to change. It's not going to be easy anymore. It's going to be harder each year to kind of increase and grow margin based on the climatic conditions. And then it's part two, is the consumers, and how do we bring the consumers along for the ride, and how do we teach them to buy wines the way the past consumers did, the consumers of the 90s and early 2000s, the baby boomers, and then the Gen X community, and like, what's the future in 20 years? Who is it? So these are the things that are going to be our biggest challenges.
So first of all, thanks for standing on the box in Hyde Park. It always takes, it takes somebody in every industry, or at least a small group of people, to be willing to stand up and say, hey, there's the elephant, right? Anybody? We're going to pay attention to that sucker? And it always takes somebody to just go, all right, it's me. I'll do it. Why? Because I can, because I'm willing to, because I can see it. Right. And I love how you said, oh, that statistician part of you. It's like, well, let's just look at numbers. Let's just look at trends. And here it is. And, a lot of us in any industry, I think, are head down, trying to get through the day, getting it done, and don't necessarily have the makeup to look at it from that angle. And I think for a lot of those of us that are called to be change agents, we tend to be outliers, right? We tend to think a little differently. We tend to bring a lot of different data points into our approach to what we do that allows us to have a different vision, a different point of view. Where do you think, in terms of when you look 20, 30, 40 years down the road, what do you think has to change, both structurally as well as from a place of mindset and consciousness?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. The one good thing about Napa Valley is if we get behind it, we will continue to be the greatest wine tourist destination in the world. We are that today, and we do it really well. We're about hospitality and good weather and good food and good wine, and we hit all the marks. We're 9s and 10s and all those things, and that's going to continue. What we have to do is we have to understand that the consumer is going to take the ride with us. We have to be leaders. Napa Valley only sells 2-3% of the wines consumed in America every year. But we think we're the best, right? Just because we make so little and it's so expensive that we think we're the best. I don't think we are the best in the world at doing it, like thinking about the environment and thinking about consumers, except for how we host travel and tourism. So, but I think we can continue down this path. We just have to be willing to change our own philosophies. We have to be willing to change our viticultural practices. I always joke around and say the guy who created Roundup, he didn't go home and not celebrate. He went home and was like, I did something that's going to be great for the agricultural community in the world. He didn't realize he's going to kill people 30, 40 years from now. Well, we know that now, right? So we have to stop using that. We have to stop using chemical weed killers. We have to start thinking about, pushing carbon into the air and what it's doing to our overall climate. It's why we're having, kind of massive, cataclysmic droughts and then rain conditions and wildfires. And we have to start thinking about like how we could be a little bit more structurally understanding of what today's output, what today's input, what the output looks like in 20 years or 30 years. Well, now we know Roundup's bad. You know, back then it was like, this is great for a growing populace, and to kind of feed this growing populace, we need, you know, more food coming through the food chain. And but now we know it was really bad. Now we have to like take that step back, and we have to look at our inputs and how they're going to have 20, 30 year of future output. And some of that is different grapevines, different rootstock, different viticultural practices, different mechanization. And also on top of it, understanding like, you know, bigger isn't better. You know, bigger glass bottles aren't better. They're actually the highest impact of carbon footprint in the wine industry is the packaging and how we are shipping these wines all around the country, around the world. So we have to think about that. And as we start to think about that on you know, from the structural inputs, they're gonna change the output in 20 to 30 or 40 years, and we're gonna become slightly more holistic with you know, from what we say, from grape to glass, grape to bottle. And with that, I think the consumers can come along for the ride with us, and they're going to appreciate it. Because if anyone today is not thinking about the next generation, whether their own children or grandchildren, and what impact they're leaving on them, you know, in the next 10, 20, or 30 years, that's the biggest crime to humanity, in my opinion. And we need to be doing that. And I don't have children. I don't own a vineyard in Napa Valley. I have nothing to lose by having this conversation with you, except the fact that I truly believe that, you know, I am a wino for life. I love this industry. I love a glass of wine on the table. And it's what's caused some of the other things in my life, like the magazine you two mentioned, to kind of come to life in a different way. And it's just a vehicle to so much great shit that I want to continue it, and I want it to go on healthily.
Yeah.
And if we're just a small part of the industry. And also, here's one thing: I'm also a very kind of proud person. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine at Jackson Family Wines was doing some really amazing stuff in climate activities within the wine industry. He was telling a story about bringing the biggest manufacturers of tractors to the Napa Valley to meet with them, to talk about the future of wine grape tractors, how to use them, how to make them the most environmentally conscious and moving forward. And John Deere, you know, this puts it all in perspective. John Deere said, "Thank you. We're not going to show up to that little brain trust conversation that you're having. We truly appreciate you asking us, but the Napa Valley is a rounding error for us. There's no reason for us to be there." So I thought about that. I'm like, Napa Valley is a rounding error, but it's a huge brand. Like, this is a brand. We could be leaders. Yeah. We are some of the smartest, you know, individuals collected in this world who own wineries here in Napa Valley that have other success in other fields. We are some of the wealthiest individuals who've had success in other places, who come here to live their third act of their life and be a vintner. We have such an incredible climate and a terroir and soil profile, and from mountains to valley floor, we have everything that should make us the best in the world. We just need to now prove it to ourselves. Everyone thinks we are. I don't think we are. We need to just prove it, and we need to like go out there and like not be a rounding error to John Deere. We need John Deere to say Napa Valley is going to help our brand, because their brand is so powerful, moving in this direction of the environment. And that pissed me off that like someone would say you guys are a rounding error. I'm like, no, I have too much pride for being a Napan right now, and I want to change that, and I want to be the best. And I want us to be the most organically farmed grapes. I want us to ban Roundup. I want us to do all the things that we need to do to prove to the world that the next generation of grape growing is the leadership is coming out of Napa Valley. And we can't say that right now. And that's my mission.
I so love the decision that why shouldn't we be leaders? We can be. Why shouldn't we be? And I think that's, to me, that is leadership. Leadership just says we can be, so why shouldn't we be? Let's do it. I think that's it. That's the only difference between leaders and people who aren't leaders, is leaders decide to be. So let's get into Masakon. So here's what I dig about So my favorite people in the world are always folks that are what I call edge riders. They're out on the front doing that edgy thing that's like other people look at them and they're like, you're doing what? Why? Right? And they like, because they're not in your head and in your world and in your point of view, they maybe can't get it at first. But there's this conviction inside that says, yeah, no, but this is the direction. So you're doing a bunch of interesting stuff at Masakon. Besides making great wine, and I love your wine, I know you've spoken about wanting to do other beverages. Great. But then you started this thing called Masakon Magazine, among others, and I'd love to hear what else you're up to, right? But like, as you get into the magazine, you're talking about NFTs, you're talking about childcare in America, you're talking about Black Lives Matter, you're talking about cultural issues. That's one part of it. And then you're doing this in conjunction with Faden Press, which is, to me, when I think about that imprint, it's more like high-end art, design, right? Very high-end lifestyle. So there's this like that side of it, but then there's this kind of social justice, like let's be human together part of it as well. What are you trying to do with the magazine? Why do you have a magazine as a winery? And what's the bigger mission for you in this world that right now Masakon is the vehicle for?
Yeah, great question. And I do get a lot of people look at me and go, "What are you doing?" Well, obviously in so it all came out of the pandemic. It all came out of this idea that when we were all isolated, we wanted to escape our isolation. So the relationship I was fortunate enough to kind of collab with Fighten was what do I want to be doing while drinking a glass of wine? And it was, I want to look at great art. I want to sit at wonderful restaurants around the world, eating amazing food. I want to kind of experience great architecture. I want to learn about, design. I want to sit in these chairs, and drink a glass of wine while I'm staring at this beautiful art on my walls and traveling to these amazing places and coming from these great restaurants. So what do you want to do when you're drinking a glass of wine? And that to me was the escapism of the pandemic for me. That was my magazine's motivation during that period. So I think anyone in the wine industry who's creating a social media account is going to take a couple of bottle shots and, sitting on a table with some food and maybe a couple people and maybe pictures of vineyards. I'm like, I'm done with that shit. I'm like, I don't need to be another winery social media account where I take a picture of a bottle or whatever. I'm like, I'm better than that. And my mind's more about conversation and storytelling. And, I always jokingly say, every marketer, every consultant tells you got to be a good storyteller. And then the way most people translate it is they start telling stories about themselves. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I don't want Masakon to tell a story about itself. I want Masakon to tell stories that connect with people, and escapism stories, aspirational stories, transformational, transportational stories, or how I engaged with magazines when I was a kid. And that was year one of the magazine. So that came out of the pandemic. But while that was happening, what was happening during the pandemic, we went through Black Lives Matter, we went through June, we went through this crazy election period and with voting rights, and then this election that was called false and fraudulent. And then we moved into the January 6th situation where we were on the brink of civil war. And every step along the way, I was fortunate to sit with a great group of people in my community who became my pod. It was just 6 of us, 6 couples and stuff, and not even 12 people, less about 10. And every time something happened, we sat down with a glass of wine and we talked about what was going on socially, culturally, economically in the world. And so year one was, what do you want to do when you're drinking a glass of wine? And then year two is, what do you talk about after you had a glass of wine? And if you're still you might be talking about the art, you might be talking about the culture, you might be talking about the furniture, but more times than less, you start to talk about the things that are surrounding your life. And so I said, well, that year one is an aspirational magazine, year two is a news magazine. So I took the initiative to say, I'm 15 years removed from the from publishing. I don't have all the old journalistic contacts that I used to. All my contacts today are wine journalists. So I sent an RFP out to 30 wine journalists, and I said, hey, I am going to pay you $1 a word, which is pretty high for freelance writer these days. I'm going to pay you $1 a word. I want 1,500 words, and I want to talk about issues that matter today. I don't want you to talk about wine. I don't want you to talk about food. It could be, if you talk about food, it's food systems and the flaws and how do we fix them. I want you to talk about the issues that are important to you. I want you to focus on an organization that is doing great shit surrounding that issue that will actually help people and help us create change, and then maybe bring a human face to it. And it took a lot of explaining to some wine writers, but a lot of people jumped on board right away. And I said, I gave like a list of 10 kind of hierarchy topics, and politics / voting, and then like underneath it you see voting rights, food systems, and then regenerative farming or gleaning. Like, so there was like ways to talk about it in a way that to kind of spur conversation. And then I just let the writers go and come up with what they want to talk about. We bounce the ideas off each other. I hire an editor, I have a designer, we hire a photographer, we hire the writer. We donate $1,000 to the organization that we focus on, that we highlight in the story, so that they know that they can continue to do great work. And right now, we talked about voting rights. We talked about gleaning. We have a whole. Gleaning is when you commercially go in and harvest the fruits or vegetables from a farm. There's a lot of stuff that is not worthy of the commercial harvest, and it's left behind to rot. So gleaning is there's an organization in Sonoma County where here, my neighbor here, that comes in and harvests all of that food that is not necessarily commercially bound, and then they box it up and they give, basically CSA. They basically give a care package to the underprivileged. They gave away over 1 million pounds of food during the pandemic. Amazing. That would have been rotting.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing approach to maximizing the farm system for good. And it's something that we forget about, but yeah, I'm excited. Next week we're publishing an article about identity in the transgender community through the lens of a young entrepreneur who is a coffee maker, a coffee roaster. So I'm just excited. I'm letting people have fun with it. People are laughing at it again as a concept. Some people are yelling at me because I'm writing about, kind of controversial shit. And it just, I got to do it. I got to reach other communities and tell people that their stories matter. And wine led me to their stories.
Here's what I want to know. I think so many brands are scared shitless of controversy. It's amplified in a cancel culture world. And here you are in a brand that doesn't have to do any of this, right? A wine brand. And yet next week you have an issue featuring a trans person, right? Like, where do you find the, for lack of a better word, the fuck it, right? That allows you to go, fuck it. This is what I'm doing. I gotta tell stories. And to me, wine and stories go together. And these are the stories we need to be talking about right now. Where do you find that in yourself?
It's just journalism. It's being a reporter, report on stuff that's happening in the world. And I'm a terrible, terrible writer. I'm a procrastinator. I give so much respect to, the reporters in my life who can churn out content, good content, and write eloquently and do it quickly. And And I just consume media in a way that that I want to be part of it. And being part of it today, I don't want to be part of the same conversation that the wine industry is pushing out there.
Yeah.
Like and part of it to me is like, and I'll be honest with you, part of it to me is a consumer marketing experiment, right? I had this conversation with a journalist in at the San Francisco Chronicle recently about why she asked me, why am I creating emojis? Why am I making NFTs? Why am I doing a magazine? And I said, because the wine industry and it talks to this, it's an echo chamber talking to the same consumers. And it's hoping that the chamber grows and grows and grows and grows. I said, well, let me just step outside of that chamber and see if I could, talk to someone who's into digital art and currency and say, hey, do you drink wine? Like, when next time you drink a bottle of wine, maybe Masakon's the one you should consider, because I'm on the same vibe as you. And see if it works.
Yeah.
And then if it doesn't work, I mean, what do I have to lose? Like, I might lose a core customer. I've had people say, I thought this was a wine, a winery, not something here to talk about voting rights in Texas. I got a lot of people yelled at me for that. I'm like, I thought you were a winery. And I'm like, yeah, I am. But, yeah.
Yeah. Here's what I love. Ever since we started this conversation, like my kind of the word that keeps coming is dreamer, explorer. Well, those are two words, but like, you're a dreamer and explorer, among other things. And I believe that we do our best work with people that share our vibe, if you will, right? So it makes sense to me that you're connecting with people that are dreamers and explorers. They don't have to agree with you, but their willingness to explore as humans, I think, to me, is part of your heart, which is then part of the heart of that brand. So that's how I see you, at least.
Well, I appreciate that. I physically don't dream that often, maybe one or two a year. So I don't know. I can't put myself in the position of being
when I say dreamer,
understanding what dream is.
Yeah,
I know. Yeah. I am no, just you. I don't. I just am not. I just can't do the same thing. I'm constantly like content creation. I can amuse myself so often in my own head that it's I have to somehow roll it out somewhere else and see if it works. And also, the thing that I do every day, it's my tradition, it's my ritual, and it's my work. I get up every morning and I spend an hour on social media. And I only have 2 apps, 3. I use Twitter as well. I don't tweet, I don't TikTok, but I go Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And I do not leave my seat until I am inspired to. And I say, and that inspiration has to come from me seeing something that I say, wow, I am jealous that I didn't create that. Mm-hmm. That 15-second video on TikTok, or that beautiful picture, or that beautiful concept, or that taking that song and mixing it with that image, or whatever, like something that said to me, that's an inspiring, get off your ass and do something great today. Because there are other people out there doing great shit every day. And so I sit there for an hour. Sometimes I have to be an hour and a half because I don't find it. I don't find that inspiration. Sometimes I'm hungover and I never find it. But but the reality of it is I love the feeling when I get jealous of someone else doing great stuff and being like, I wish I did that. And that's what gets me to do all these fun little side hustles and to figure out whether or not I can build audiences and do some cool stuff. And well, at the heart and core of it is I make really delicious white wines that I find to be they're expensive in the wine space. They're inexpensive for Napa Valley, Sonoma County. And I will continue to make as much of those as I can to explore new avenues of connection with people.
Awesome. Two final questions. One, and this is maybe the most obvious question ever. but I hope for listeners, you can hear, like, your love for wine is infectious. I want to know what you love about wine. What is wine to you?
It's a never-ending story. It started out as a fear, sitting in a restaurant and having being laughed at by a sommelier because I couldn't pronounce an appellation in Burgundy or Bordeaux or a grape variety. It started out as fear, then it was built into a comforting confidence with, and then a human relationship with stories behind the wines, learning about people and places and how they connect with their places to bring you this beverage. It's about the never-ending destination of like where you'll find great wine today. The exploration, there's just 30 years ago, I always jokingly say, when I'm having this conversation about climate, if Bob Mondavi in 1967 knew that Vega Sicilia, knew that Barcavella, knew that Grange existed, Napa Valley wouldn't be Chateau Napa Valley. It wouldn't be focused solely on Bordeaux grape varieties. He would have had, if he was standing here today in 2021, the top 25 wineries in the world aren't all Bordeaux wineries. So why would a region that has great potential just solely focus on Bordeaux varieties? So I think about how vast, the universe of wine is in front of me. And it's like, I'm always going to change. Like our palates change, or as we get older, everything changes. Our taste, flavor, sensory, our experiences, our romances, they all wine is that, Proust. It's that, it's a remembrances of things past. It's the, the Madeleine. It's like, it's all those things that, as you grow older, you build a reservoir of nostalgia and romance. And I find those in wine every time I share a glass of wine. But it's also, it's also a vehicle. Like I said, it's a vehicle. It's like, where do I want to have a glass of wine? It's a vehicle where of what we're going to talk about after the glass of wine. And that to me is what I love about wine. I'm over like the geeky chemistry of wine and the this, that, and the other thing. And this person's an a winemaker like this style and this format. And like, that's all well and good. And that's easy, and you need to make wine easy for yourself, because not everyone wakes up every day giving a shit about wine. So you need to make it as easy as possible. And for me, I make it as complex and complicated as possible in my daily life as my job. I want to just keep challenging myself, because if we don't have any challenges, there's no fun.
Yeah. All right. Last piece. I always, my mission in life is to help activate a new story for humanity. I feel like the story we've lived in so many ways, in so many arenas of life, whether it be climate or government and voting or the stories we've been living are, I think they've run their course. And we always create with story, that's always the beginning. We tell the story and then that becomes our world. So I feel like there's new stories in every corner of society beginning to be told, beginning to pop up. And I'm curious, if you were to say, oh yeah, if I can have a hand in activating a new story and telling a new story, whether it be around wine or anything, what do you feel like the new story or stories are that you're here to help tell?
Climate aside is, the one thing that I want to, be part of my, continuing story. I haven't got there yet. I don't know if I ever will get there yet, but I do truly believe I look for as many kind of technological efficiencies in my life to kind of allow me to help me do my business, streamline my workflow, my productivity. I truly believe that the blockchain is going to change everything. It is going to be like, there is going to be, because every story is going to have its like every product, everything will have its pathway on this kind of open highway of information that is completely linear, and it kind of traces everything back. And I do think that this is going to be something that we have not yet experienced. We don't know where it's potentially going to go, but I do think that that technology of what was been put in place starting in the late aughts, 2007, 8, 9, and then really hasn't come into the conversation until post 2017. I really think that we are in the infancy stages of recreating the world's technology and how it records life. And we haven't figured out how it's going to help integrate with our own personal day-to-day living, but when it does, and it will, that kind of Web 3.0 that everyone's talking about, the metaverse, it's crazy, man. And I think it's going to be the most brilliant thing, and it's going to happen seamlessly into our lives, but be the most important thing to make us more efficient in everything we do. Mm-hmm. So we can spend our time doing other stuff. Like, we should never have to waste time on things that there were roadblocks into getting to finishing the from point A to point C, and allow you to do other things in your life, whether it's spend time with your family or do good for humanity or whatever it is. I think I wish I had a pathway there. I don't, but I support it. I look at it from a distance. I applaud it when things are going well. So I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's really going to be awesome.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I do see a world where so much of what we do as humans is no longer required. Yeah. And then the question is, now what? And I think there's tremendous potential in the now what. And I think that is definitely a big part of it. And I look forward to where we go.
No, I agree. I mean, everyone's now, the terminology is coming into current conversation, but the thing called the super app, I'm like, just look at WeChat. Look what the Asian community, Chinese community did with WeChat. Like, it will destroy Amazon. It will destroy social media platforms. It'll be the most human. It's like it just ties everything together. Yeah. And I think tying things together isn't about privacy and isn't about all the other things. It's literally about human efficiency in a way that allow you to live your life to its fullest potential without having to waste time. And then, awesome. That's the coolest shit that's going to happen. I hope I can get myself involved in that in some way. So,
I'll join you.
Thanks, Jeff. With a glass of wine.
That's right. Dan, it has been really sweet spending this time with you. Thanks for sharing your time, your genius. For those of you who are interested, you can find Dan's wine at masakon.com. That's MASSICAN.com. You can find a link to the magazine under Muses. You can find the wines under Shop. I will say wine's one of my great loves and hobbies. And I adore crisp, minerally, high acid white wines. Your wines have just like they got me into a whole new world I didn't even know about Friulian wines before you. So thanks for introducing that to my life. And then you do a lot on Instagram. So that's Masakon Winery on Instagram/Masakon Winery. Any other places, we'll link to it in the description. But I want to encourage folks to check out your wine, to get a bottle of it, and log on to Masakon Winery and read the magazine and have a glass and talk about what you read with your friends. So, Dan, thank you so much. And until next time.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate you having me on.